good afternoon, and welcome to an abbreviated section of History and Systems of Psychology. I'm joining you on a Wednesday due to our power outage yesterday. What we'll be covering today includes a quick review of last week's content and additionally information about Binet. Our final class, which will be tomorrow, will cover Binet in a little bit more detail as well as Piaget. As a reminder, your exam will open up on Tuesday and close on Sunday the 11th at 11:59 p.m. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about Maslow. As you may recall from our discussion last week, he was Jewish, and he was Jewish during the 1930s, which was a hard time to be of that faith. He experienced the impact of pervasive anti-Semitism when he moved to New York, but he also found like-minded individuals, psychologists specifically, who had fled Germany for the United States. He eventually obtained a position as a professor at Brooklyn College, which allowed him to stay in New York after graduation from the University of Wisconsin. Additionally, when he was in New York, he met Ruth Benedict, who was a mentor both to Maslow's wife, who was a student at the University of Wisconsin, as well as Maslow. And we discussed that she encouraged Maslow to write a book that married the concepts of anthropology and psychology together. And that was something that would interest Maslow for the remainder of his life. We talked about some of the Neo-Freudian mentors of Maslow, one being Adler. On the exam, you'll need to know that Adler is known for what we call the family constellation. He was a psychologist who believed that the impact of your placement within the family had a lot to do with how your personality developed. He also emphasized parenting styles and the role that parenting styles played in a child's development. He was one of the first to offer an extensive array of literature related to best parenting practices for young parents so that they could raise a psychologically healthy child. And finally, he is associated with the concept of the felt plus and the felt minus. The felt minus is this idea that perhaps you grew up and wanted to pursue a certain career, but, and this is just one example, but were dissuaded by your parents, and they might have given you various reasons, ranging from maybe not being that talented, or you can't pursue that career because it won't pay enough. Regardless of the issue, you go on to neglect that aspect of yourself and pursue a different path, which may be another path of your choosing, or one that is more heavily influenced by your parents and your teachers. You get to adulthood and you may have this idea of feeling like a felt minus, feeling as though something is missing because you were not able to pursue that passion. And Adler saw adulthood as a time where we could address some of the issues that may have occurred in childhood and work toward developing that aspect of ourselves, thereby moving from a felt minus to a felt plus. Karen Horney was a Neo-Freudian. She was trained by Freud and did conduct psychoanalysis. She is a female, of course, and her ideas about psychology and the theoretical underpinnings of psychology are a little bit different because of that viewpoint. She disregarded a lot of Freud's emphasis on psychosexual impulses being the driver of personality development, and even went so far as to say, you know, Freud says we have penis envy, but how about womb envy? There could be something that perhaps males would be envious of when it comes to women, namely their ability to procreate. Karen Horney is known for her sociocultural approach to personality development and the concept of moving away, against, and toward. You'll need to know those concepts for the exam. Moving toward maybe aligning with a certain idea or a certain person for one's benefit. Moving against, of course, is the opposite. And then moving away would be distancing yourself from an idea or a person because of its potential toxicity. In a healthy individual, all three ways of moving through society are recommended, and we employ all of those. In a neurotic individual, they are using one of those three to the exclusion of the other two. So they may be someone who moves toward people and as a result becomes very passive, becomes reliant on other people, has lowest self-esteem. Also want to briefly mention Erich Fromm. He developed the conviction that human beings were unique among animals due to their relative freedom from domination by their instincts. And the domination of instincts is something that was critical to Freud's psychoanalysis. Moving on a bit. Maslow was greatly impacted by Wertheimer and Goldstein. Okay. Like I said, Maslow earned a position at Brooklyn College as a professor. He was not paid a great amount, but it was a wonderful time period for him, both in his professional life as well as his academic life. He became very popular with students. Students would not only come to him for help with their psychology assignments, but also sometimes seek informal counseling. And Maslow seemed to have a knack for this type of counseling. He was able to put the ideas of the Neo-Freudians and his mentors to test during this informal counseling. And he started to see a need based on these students who would talk with him for a type of psychology that was dedicated to more of the normal, healthy personality. So, being Maslow, he developed such a course and began teaching one. One of the main concepts that Maslow is known for is this idea of self-actualization, which is, in a nutshell, be all that you can be. So using the gifts that you were given, your intelligence, your kindness, we want you to reach that pinnacle of self-actualization. In order to do so, however, Maslow said that we need other things to be met, and thus he established a triangle, which is the hierarchy of needs. At the bottom of that triangle are our needs for food and shelter. It's hard to be self-actualized if you don't have a consistent place to sleep at night and you don't have regular availability to food. Once the physiological needs are met, we look more toward the safety needs. Maybe you do have a place to sleep, but it's unsafe. There could be violence in the home, there could be violence in the community, and that's going to encumber you from becoming self-actualized. Having a hard time with that word today. Belongingness and love needs are next, followed by esteem needs. So just to reiterate, self-actualization can only occur when all those other needs have been met. And it's important to note that during your life, you may go up and down on that triangle. It's not only upward mobility that we will see, and sometimes you will plateau and maybe stay on that vertical alignment for a while. There is also the proposition of an extra a sixth area once you develop self-actualization, and that's known as transcendence. And I believe that I have a video link posted that goes into a little bit more detail about the concept of transcendence. All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch over into our PowerPoint for today over Alfred Binet. Alfred Binet and Piaget are both discussed in chapter 13 of your textbook. Before tomorrow, I would like for you to read that closely, especially the information on Piaget, so that we have a basis for discussion of his life and his ideas tomorrow. Binet was born in 1857 and lived until 1911. He was born in Nice, France, to a father who was a physician and a mother who was, quote, an amateur artist. Binet was very timid growing up. He was not a rebellious person like some of the other psychologists we have covered, including Darwin, but rather liked to be at home, would be someone we would classify as being very introverted. Well, his father wanted to cure his timidity, and he attempted to do that, being a physician, by showing his young son a cadaver. Alfred Binet was beside himself with horror. And the result of that was that rather than curing him of being timid, it merely served to increase his anxiety and haunted him pretty much for the rest of his life. Not all parenting strategies are created equal. Binet did not come out of high school wanting to be a psychologist. He actually earned a degree in law, but never pursued that practice. He tried medical school. Unsurprisingly, the horror of the cadaver bled over to medical school, and the operating room terrified him. He suffered a breakdown and actually had to withdraw from medical school, of course, not completing a degree there. Well, what is one to do when you're 22, have earned a law degree but are not using it and have dropped out of medical school? Well, he had time and family money to spend looking at all of the great works in a library in Paris. He found particular interest in experimental psychology and believed wholeheartedly that he had found his vocation. He was going to be a psychologist. So now the question was, what do I do now? After extensive reading on the topic, Binet plunged headfirst into psychology, very enthusiastically, but also in an undisciplined manner. His lack of training didn't dissuade him from doing research and publishing, though, which is quite interesting. He became interested in something known as the 2-point threshold and published his new findings in a journal, already or not knowing that this theory and findings had already been published by someone before him who was pretty famous. And this famous person made this known to Binet. Well, recognizing that he was not going to be a founder of this area of psychology, he became interested in the work of John Stuart Mill, one of Locke's successors, specifically in the area of associationistic psychology. This resulted in a second publication. Unfortunately, hypnotism and abnormal psychology had already established that ideas can actually become dissociated from each other, and that based on the stimulus that is given, we may have totally different trains of association in our brains under different motivational conditions. Binet was fortunate enough to escape a second public scathing of his work. All right, we can see that as a strike 2 for him. But he does not give up. He's going to find a way into the discipline of psychology. He volunteers to work as an unpaid assistant for Charcot. Charcot, as you may remember, was a hypnotist and very famous. He set up a center for the study of hypnotism. He remained with Charcot for 8 years and during this time published 3 books and 20 papers. Also during this time, Charcot's reputation suffered as people became more and more suspicious of hypnotism and, is this really a science? Does it really work? Binet recognized that he'd put a lot of blind faith in Charcot's name and prestige and had accepted his theories too uncritically. By this time, Binet learned a hard but invaluable lesson on how experiments and research should not be conducted. Around this time, like I mentioned, people were starting to discredit hypnosis on a grand scale. Binet was doing some research at home, however. He had 2 children, 2 daughters, and a lot of his early research on intelligence was research that he gleaned from observing and testing his children. This is also something that he has in common with Piaget, a psychologist we'll be talking about in class tomorrow. He met up with Henri Beaunis, who had created and was director of a new laboratory for physiological study at the Sorbonne in France. And Binet again asked, can I study with you and can I be your lab assistant at no pay? This finally, pun intended, paid off for Binet. He gained great recognition as France's leading psychologist and became the director of the lab in 1894. So in just 3 years, he went from begging for an unpaid assistantship at this lab to becoming its director. During this time, like I told you, he was testing his young daughters, and he found that the intelligence tests, like Galton's measures, weren't maybe as great at assessing intelligence as Galton had thought. He found when he put the measures to the test, his children did about as well as adults on reaction time if they were encouraged to pay close attention to the task at hand. Where there were differences is reaction time lagged when the girls did not pay attention to the reaction time, and I hope that makes sense. Based on these findings, Binet hypothesized that rather than having differences in neurological activity and sensitivity, rather, children had attentional differences, and that was one of the key components to distinguish brains of adults from those of children. Had to be found in attention level, how long we can sustain and focus our attention. In short, he believed that good intelligence tests would indicate major differences between children and adults. After coming to this realization, Binet worked to develop his own intelligence test. And one of the goals of these intelligence tests would be to measure higher order, more complex functions such as abstract reasoning and language. One of Binet's lasting legacies was on his controlled experiments. He conducted experiments on suggestibility in children, and in doing so, he set the stage for modern and experimental social psychology. His tests summarized results statistically, So you would get a number in terms of intelligence, but at the same time, Binet recognized that numbers did not reveal everything. There was also a need for a descriptive element. And so by having a number regarding someone's intelligence along with more of a descriptive component, you could come to a more fully fleshed out understanding of that person's intelligence overall. He studied two very interesting and gifted individuals. These are people who were known as lightning calculators. These two men had amazing mathematical ability. And from studying these two individuals, I'm sure that was probably fascinating in and of itself, Binet learned that gifted abilities were exercised in different ways. Comparing the two men's styles, one, when he was computing, saw the numbers in his head, while the other heard the numbers as he computed. So two very different ways of processing and going about accomplishing the same task. In general, based on this information as well as his children's information, he noticed that some people are systematic and methodical. And this was very true of his oldest daughter. When he would ask his daughter to do a writing prompt, she was very systematic and methodical, and it was very fact-based. Others worked best during intense and spontaneously inspired episodes, and this is reflected in what he had to say about his youngest child. So both children were asked to write about a leaf, and the oldest child wrote in a way that was fact-driven, it was very serious and academic style, while his other daughter sought a much more creative approach to the problem. Along with Victor Henry, he eventually launched what was called an individual psychology program. And his original tests were around 2 hours long. These provided a lot of information that had taken him a long time to discover through the case studies that he did. In 1903, Binet published the Experimental Study of Intelligence, where he discussed the many experiments that were done on his children. Although these tests of individual psychology were ultimately unsuccessful in really unpacking what intelligence was, they did pave way toward his famous intelligence test. In fact, the Binet intelligence test of 1905 marked a turning point in psychology. There were revisions made in 1908 and 1911, and the age-standardized levels of the test provided a way to produce a single score for each individual. On Thursday, we will finish discussing Binet, and I have a short video to show you. After that, we will begin our discussion and finish our discussion of Piaget, as well as review for the exam. It is my plan to have a study guide for you during class on Thursday, and that would be a great time if you have any questions about the exam or about the last day of class. You can let me know then. Thank you, and have a great day.